Strangler Lewis was a notorious tough man in the beginning of the 20th century. He entered professional wrestling as it was a burgeoning entertainment
This
form.
was before the term serial killer.
This was before the... I don't know if it was before the term serial killer. It was after Jack the Ripper. But yeah, it was right. The Strangler. Gotcha. He's one of the guys who solidified what pro wrestling would become for the next 80 years in America. Him along with promoter Toots Mont and his manager... what was his manager's first name? Sandow. Billy Sandow, known as the Gold Dust Trio. They came up
Was he related to legendary strongman Eugene Sandow?
I don't know.
Are you familiar with him?
No.
He was arguably the first lifting star of America, and he is also a minor character in the Venture Brothers,
Okay.
or a fictionalized version of him.
We got levels.
Butts.
You are listening.
High levels.
High
Butts.
butts. You are listening to High Butts, the podcast where we talk about high-waisted jeans and what you can do to wear them in public or by yourself. And you might think that they were just for moms in the 80s, but they're for everybody now. So get ready for an hour of that shit.
He's not getting paid to say that, but if you'd like to pay him to say that, please contact us.
Speaking of hot 80s moms, how many of y'all would jump on Karen Wheeler?
Wait, is that Winona Ryder?
No, that is Karen Wheeler. That is the one that almost fucked Billy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
That whole lineup at the pool, I was into.
And
much
Joyce, also Joyce, right?
Pretty much everybody in that show who is over the age of 18, I would at least get naked with and hug. You are listening to Contesting Wrestling. This is episode number 5-ish. We are the podcast where we talk about everything that fans love and everything everybody else maybe doesn't about the world's most popular form of simulated combat. The basic idea of the show is that we've all been friends for many, many years. We'll go around and introduce ourselves. One of them is a professional wrestler. One of them is an academic with a lifelong love of wrestling. I am somebody who generally doesn't care for it. And we are on a journey where I can try to understand why people enjoy wrestling and what is cool about it. I am a writer. Oh, my name is Evan Burke. Let's throw this to my co-host, Ben Abelson.
I am Dr. Ben Abelson. I am a professor of philosophy at Mercy College and a lifelong fan of professional wrestling. And I'm going to tell you about why wrestling is good.
And my name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been in the professional wrestling world for about 10 years. I've trained in a couple of places, most notably with Johnny Rods and then with Chikara for several years. You'll hear me on commentary in Chikara, wrestle the occasional matches, do commentary for a group called Ironbound Wrestling Alliance. I've been doing it in the Bronx. At me if you'd like to book me, and listen to this podcast to learn why you'd like to book me.
And today we have a special guest, a fourth chair for the first time.
This guest is inspired by the question, which is the question most, I think, new people to wrestling would ask, why are refs? What does a ref do? What is the point of a referee in this match? And so we brought a referee in to explain to my dumbass what reffing is. And so, please introduce yourself.
Hello. Why are refs indeed, Evan? Why are refs? This is Betsy Ross, a.k.a. B. Ross. You can follow me on Twitter at bchikaross, or you can also find my email for bookings. Book me. Use me. I love reffing. Please let me count at your things. It's how I live.
If we get out of line, she'll count at us rather sternly.
1.
So keep it.
Keep
Keep it together.
We really actually probably should have had her on the past episodes.
1.
I kind of need someone counting at me all the time to get me to not, do things that I'm not supposed to do.
Holds on the ropes, Ben.
I would like to propose that the thing that you are describing is something called mortality. The knowledge that you have a limited amount of time and every day you eat a little bit more of that time and you're never getting it back.
We've gone off the rails.
So we're talking about death, and naturally that leads to the man who either is death, or is death's emissary, or is death's helper, or I don't understand the nature of the man that we call the Undertaker.
He helps people go to the other side.
He's the Grim Reaper.
He's undead.
Well, okay, so those are all different things, though. This is what
He's
I'm very
all of those
confused.
things.
But
He's
all
been
of
a character for a long time. For the real explanation, He's managed to reinvent himself while still being unquestionably The Undertaker for almost 30 years now. Every few years, he adds a little something to his act. He takes a little something away. Some of the changes are more extreme than others. You know, the first change was they just got a better remix of his music and he put on purple gloves instead of gray ones. And one time he stopped being an undead wizard and just came out as a biker who called himself The Undertaker for a few years. And you know what? He made it work.
He had a midlife crisis.
He
That's a
came
lot
out
of
to
guys.
Kid Rock.
And Limp Bizkit.
And Limp Bizkit. He stood on stage with Limp Bizkit at Wrestlemania one year. And then one year he was just like, nah, I'm The Undertaker again, put the hat and the coat back on, and he was an undead wizard once again.
And Limp Bizkit were announced that year as the WWE's favorite band in the entire world.
I remember.
And they still are.
I remember that moment very clearly, and it was actually instrumental into leading to this podcast in a lot of ways, because I wouldn't have my distaste for wrestling had it not been, at least in part, for Limp Bizkit.
And your disdain for Limp Bizkit?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm not as disdained at Limp Bizkit as I used to be because because Doc forced me not to be.
I guess I'm more anti-Fred Durst, I guess. Like, you can have...
Fred Durst is not positive on the world.
No,
I think
no.
we can agree on that.
Fred Durst is definitely pushing us into the red as a society.
Yes. He wore red hats before everyone else did.
So I think the idea with The Undertaker is originally he was supposed to just be an Undertaker back when all the wrestlers, like, their gimmick was that they had another job besides wrestling. I don't know, was the economy really bad at the time or something?
People couldn't believe that they were just wrestlers. They were like,
Yeah.
I don't think this is all this guy is doing for a living. Like,
Right, and then so I guess the idea is like, well, you know, Undertakers are kind of creepy, and maybe like you might be suspicious, well, maybe this guy is actually really dead himself, and that's why he likes being around cadavers so much.
has he ever had powers of any kind, magical abilities?
Oh, yes. He's been
Yeah.
able to shoot lightning, teleport in various ways.
He's risen from the dead once or twice.
So I asked Betsy, what are two matches that are an example of great reffing and an example of terrible reffing, so I can understand what is the difference.
So I picked two matches that just by coincidence happened to take place in 2008. The good reffing one features Jimmy Corderas and Charles Robinson both as referees. It is from WrestleMania 24, and it is Edge versus Undertaker. Everyone involved in that match just does an amazing job. It's an amazing match, but the refs really took it to another level too there. For a bad match, I went to good old late 2000s TNA and got Bound for Glory 2008 Monsters Ball 4-way tag match featuring special guest referee, which, by the way, is almost always a sign of bad reffing about to happen, Mongo McMichael. Mongo McMichael was a very entertaining wrestler. He was never that great, was he?
Those are two very different qualities.
Yes.
Like, I like watching Mongo matches because it looks like they didn't tell him it was fake, and he just ran into people and then dropped them on their head, and they let him because he was a football player.
Just those pile drivers he looks. I'm surprised no one ever got like every time the person was on the show the next week after taking one, I'm like, oh, he's still alive. That's nice. Yeah. And
so that guy, the ref in the bad matches, was primarily a football player.
He won
Yes.
the Super Bowl for Chicago.
He has
in
a
the
Super Bowl
80s.
ring.
Like, he was part of the very famous Chicago Bears. You ever hear the Super Bowl Shuffle?
I think so.
I believe he was on that track. It was a hit in the 80s. It was yeah.
Then he was an announcer for WCW, and he was pretty bad at that as well, but in a kind of entertaining way because he was just so rambly and incoherent.
Incoherent, yeah, completely.
He brought a little dog with him, and who would dress up the little dog, and they'd get shots of that.
Did people like him because since he came from football, like that adds some sort of a veneer?
People didn't like him.
People didn't like him.
No, they were like, why is this guy who's not a wrestler on the show? And they were like, so people who knew who he was
People
would check
liked
it out.
him ironically.
Yeah, people like him more now because you watch it and you're like, this is amusing because he clearly isn't talking about anything.
I'm sure he's a very nice guy.
And not only
Maybe.
did they then make him a wrestler, which he wasn't very good at, but they made him a member of the Four Horsemen, one of the most elite stables of wrestlers.
It was Ric
in
Flair's
wrestling
stable.
history.
This is all primarily, by the way, while he was still in his physical prime. Like, he was a little beat up from football, but he was still fairly young.
He was in his mid-30s. He could do it.
So let's flash to 10 years later when he's like 50 and hasn't been in the business for, what, like a decade now?
Yeah, by the time the Bound for Glory match happens, his knees clearly didn't work. His hips clearly hadn't
He
worked.
doesn't look like he's tried to touch his toes in about a decade.
You know what you need to be able to do?
I thought Abyss was coming out without his mask on when I first watched it.
You know what's really important as a ref is, and I've seen so many people who tried to train like as refs that didn't understand this, is you need to be able to move. I remember one person in particular, it's like they were training to be a ref with me and their knee, like they couldn't get on the ground fast enough. So you put someone whose knees don't work in a ring as a ref, it's never going to work that well.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask, I had some questions here that I was thinking about while I was watching this. So are refs people who also wrestle? Like, are they also wrestlers, or is it a different track, kind of?
Any good ref knows how to wrestle. They don't necessarily do it. Like, I don't do it as of right now because I'm not good enough at it. Hopefully at some point soon I'll be good enough at it. But some refs never wrestle a match. One of the best referees in wrestling right now is Mr. Bryce Remsburg. He has yet to wrestle a single match, but he's trained as a wrestler. I've never personally trained with him, but everyone I've asked said he could out-wrestle pretty much anyone in the room.
I think historically, refs were often wrestlers who were just kind of undersized.
Yeah.
Back in the day, before there was a variety of body types and sizes of wrestlers, when you kind of had to be pretty big physically in order to do it, the people who were smaller ended up as refs.
You did still, to this day, though, you have to be in very good shape. You can't, like, one thing that Betsy was alluding to is that she's trained with, and I've seen people who thought, oh, I'll be a ref, and they thought that meant they didn't have to be in good shape. They didn't have to learn how to wrestle. It would just be a free ticket into the ring. And they also, like we're going to explore on this podcast, they don't know what the ref really does and how important it is and how precision it is and how much you really have to be right there with the timing of an athlete. Bryce Remsburg, I've seen ref hours on end because other refs weren't available. He'll finish his match, he'll run in the curtain, chug some water, do a couple of incline push-ups to keep his blood going, and run back to the ring.
He also recently reffed this match where he was the only performer in the ring.
No, he wasn't. There was 2 invisible men.
Okay, fair enough.
All right, yeah. This sounds like a brilliant piece of
we should watch
comedy
that.
right there. Yeah, that sounds.
Why
amazing.
don't we watch that? Why don't we show Evan that?
We should show Evan that at some point for sure.
Yeah.
At some
for
point,
this episode, it would make sense.
Well, we'll have to. I'm sure we'll also do. I mean, we're hoping to have hundreds of episodes, so we'll do more
Now.
on refs in the future.
Eventually, we
Certainly.
want to get into the more sort of absurdist, performance arty kind of stuff. And I think maybe we'll save that for
Yeah.
We're
I'm-
still keeping it fairly basic here. The most out there thing we'll do is introduce Evan to Mongo.
I'm just learning about the Undertaker now and Edge, who what a delightful character this gentleman is.
the rated R superstar.
He's
How young do you have to be for that to sound like edgy to you?
I get yeah, I'm gonna say that's an 11 to 14 range.
I hated Edge so much at that point, at that age. I wasn't in wrestling yet. I was just a fan of wrestling. I wanted Edge dead.
In the storyline, he was engaged to the beloved Eddie Guerrero's widow.
That was the lady at the
Vicky.
beginning.
Yes.
Yes.
Because that was nice. It's nice to see people come out and support, their loved ones. I don't know.
I mean,
feel like you
Vicky
don't
was
see that a lot.
such an amazing performer.
Depending on your perspective, that's either the most tasteless thing or one of the most tasteless things that WWE has ever done.
What have I just defended?
Or this like wonderful instance in which they supported someone's family in the wake of
Vicky
their death.
became an excellent performer. They gave her the chance to develop, but by the time she got her groove going, she was the hottest heel in wrestling. If you've ever been to an arena where she comes out, it's the heat. I can only really describe it as to when I was a teenager going to Madison Square Garden and I would see The Rock come out when he was a heel before he turned face, and the crowd would be chanting "Rocky sucks" on the first beat of his music. the first. They would hear the first note, and immediately they all knew that was the Ra. And he did pretty good for himself, as it turns out.
With Vicky, it was the "excuse me."
Oh, she sounded like every awful second grade teacher you've ever had.
Me and Doc were at the Rumble, and when that "excuse me" hit, the place popped, and then for just a second, and then immediately drowned into booze. And it had been years that since we had seen Vicky on TV at that point.
And that's that really strange ambivalence with wrestling fans, where they really, really, really loved to hate her so much, but in a sense
to the point where, like, you know, it gives you pause.
Well, there's a fondness that comes for this despised character, just because they've given you so much enjoyment in despising them.
It's really it's hard to really put it like this, but it's not malicious. There had been times in wrestling history where that kind of heat was malicious, but those times are kind of past. Some people think that was the only real heat. I don't know. I disagree. I think characters like Vicky Guerrero is what they need right now, where people will come to boo her and to see her as the villain, lose and all that. Few people can pull it off as consistently and as hard.
I'll have to see some stuff with her, because now I feel like there are huge dimensions to this character who at least was tossed off. She
wasn't a physical character at all. She'd occasionally take a bump here and there, but she wasn't really a wrestler. She was an auxiliary character, and she played all the auxiliary characters.
Edge strikes me as somebody who, he's a face wrestler, not in the sense of the heel face dichotomy, but that in most of his wrestling ability seems to come from his face. He's like a commedia dell'arte, fucking Pagliacci clown character. I can see why he actually had a career afterwards as a character actor on. Yeah, he's on that show Haven, which
he
is
gets work.
Yeah, he seems like a really good. He seems like a good actor. This was the first match that I've seen where I got the acting part of wrestling, really, that you guys have shown me. Where the other ones have had characters who I got the story and I like sort of what they were trying to say. But this is the first one where it really seemed like two dudes who are truly expressing their characters.
And The Undertaker, of course, is perhaps the greatest example of a wrestler expressing a character effectively. Going back to talking about the Undertaker gimmick, the sort of amazing thing about him is that character, that gimmick, could have been the stupidest thing ever. It could
in
have
the
been
wrong hands. Yeah.
Absolutely awful and cartoony and dumb. And he brought it to life in a way that made it the most effective, most successful wrestling character in history.
He comes out wearing what I can only describe as a sort of like a sex tarp, kind of. I don't even know what you could possibly call that. That's.
Well, I think it was very Hellraiser inspired, I think.
Do you think...
Okay. So sex tarp is probably accurate.
Yes, that makes little sense.
Do you think he sleeps in a tent that gives him sexual powers?
According to his wear in this match. And then he took it off and he's just got, I guess, what are supposed to look like leather pants and a tank top. But that is that is the sex tarp. I don't know. Maybe he's got that in the coffin. He comes out looking very sweaty. So maybe he's wearing that in the coffin.
No hat this time. Also.
No hat this time. I wonder what happened to his hat. That's usually a big part of his costume. Maybe it caught fire. One time his pyro went off errantly and his big coat caught fire. And he usually comes out all stoic and they put the camera on him and it's just him waving his arms, pulling his jacket off,
running to the ring.
On the ground, runs to the ring all angry. We'd better get this match over with before these inevitable second-degree burns set in. Damn it. And he did.
I will say,
because he's the Undertaker.
One of the great things about this match, though, they talk about the Undertaker Wrestlemania streak, and at this point it was 15 matches, 15-0. It's probably not the greatest match of the Wrestlemania streak. Most people talk about Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels.
Yes, that is in my opinion the greatest match of his streak.
But I think, and some people think that's the greatest match of all time, actually. But I think part of what was so great about that Undertaker-Shawn Michaels match was they were both already starting to fall apart a little bit, and that sort of added to the drama of it. Whereas at this point in the Edge-Undertaker match that we're talking about, Undertaker, despite being well into his 40s, is still at the height of his powers at this point. And he pulls off a lot of really cool, innovative, athletic stuff.
If anything, the guy that's more broken is Edge. You mentioned how much he expresses in his face. He learned how to do that, at least in part, because he had broken his neck, and he had like neck fusion surgery, and his career was on borrowed time. He only wrestled a few more years after that, until one day they told him, if you wrestle anymore, you could just be paralyzed, so tonight's your last match, and that was that.
Yeah, he was sort of more of a big spot type wrestler before that. He was in like the original TLC matches, tables, ladders, and chairs matches, and so yeah, he was known for taking these big risks and stuff.
Sort of like he would push things to the edge.
Right. Exactly.
You're getting it. You're getting it.
He might as well have Edgy tattooed like across his nipples. Like
so he had
so
to
90s.
Yeah, so after he broke his neck,
his music is done by a cut rate Creed band that I called Rules in my head.
Evan,
the guitar
Evan,
work.
But
Oh my God, he doesn't know.
Evan.
is it
doesn't
actually
know.
is it actually Creed?
No, it's Alter Bridge. It's Creed without Scott Stapp. So you nailed it, man.
I did nail it.
It's Creed with another singer.
I did nail it.
Yeah.
But
Good.
yo,
Look, I'm good for you, Mark Tremonti.
Yeah,
Yo,
good for
the
you, Mark
guitar-
Tremonti.
Tremonti is freaking awesome on that track, man.
Tremonti's
He
not
tears
a
it up.
bad.
Yes.
Tremonti wasn't the problem with Creed. That's a whole other conversation.
Only people between the ages of 32 and 37 are going to understand
I
what
kind
we're
of
talking about.
kind of get
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
I know that Alter Bridge is Creed without Scott Stapp. I know
Yes.
that
Yes,
much.
that already is a burden of knowledge.
But yeah, so after so as we were saying, after
Alter Bridge is Creed without
Yeah.
Scott Stapp. I'm sorry.
so after breaking his neck, he had to become edgy in a different way.
Mm.
And so there was a lot of at the time they hadn't reverted to this PG thing yet, so they could kind of push the envelope in terms of sex and violence a little bit more. After winning his first WWE title, he had what he called a live sex celebration.
A nipple fell out.
With his then real life, at least sometime lover, Lita. That was her nipple that fell out.
Yeah, it was Lita's nipple.
And that's a really interesting story in and of itself, and led to Edge's success to a large degree, because there was this real life thing that happened where Lita, who was dating another wrestler, Matt Hardy, cheated on him with Edge, and it got out, and that sort of turned the whole fan base against Edge. He was already a heel, but it made them hate him with a kind of genuine passion that they hadn't hated him with before that, and that propelled him to the main event.
Some of it, you got to Evan will never quite get that, I don't think, because some of it was the fandom had always like even like the serious wrestling fans had always like shipped, so to speak, Matt and Lita super hard too.
Yeah.
Like they were like one of the like first couples in wrestling. Lita cheated on Matt with one of his best friends, Edge.
So how much of all that actually happened?
All
That
of it.
actually happened.
All of that actually happened.
So that was
yes.
all like straight up real.
Yes.
And then turned into a wrestling storyline.
Yes,
Matt
exactly.
Hardy
Okay.
went
Right.
crazy and got fired, and he worked the Indies for a couple of months, and then they rehired him to work a program with Edge, which he did because he's a professional, and they offered him a lot of money.
Doc and I were at Madison Square Garden the night that the crowd turned on Lita, because Lita
Yeah.
was still a babyface in the storyline, but the crowd knew all about this real stuff that was happening and slut-shamed her for it.
Can you
Yes.
refresh my memory? What storyline was she in kayfabe at the point that happened?
She was feuding with Trish Stratus, who
That
had
doesn't narrow it down, Ben.
No, not at all.
She feuded
When-
with Trish Stratus for like 6 years.
when Trish had Big Daddy V in her corner. Or was he Big Daddy V yet? Or is he still
I think
Viscera?
he was Viscera, the world's
think he was
largest
still
love
Viscera,
machine.
yeah.
Well, he wasn't the world's largest love
No.
machine yet, I don't think, because
Evan, you want to see a sex tart? You got
because
to
the
see
crowd
Viscera.
turned on Lita,
Yeah.
it ended up inadvertently turning Big Daddy V face.
Right.
And I think that led to the world's largest love
Viscera,
machine
the world's
stuff.
largest.
Isn't
love
that
machine.
eventually when he turns on Trish though and like squishes her and takes her out for a bit?
Maybe.
I'm feeling very alienated right now.
I'm sorry, we
And
got
then-
off track.
yeah,
It's like when people start talking about World of Warcraft.
Oh,
you
yeah.
get far enough into it, you're like, I know this all makes
Oh,
sense.
I
but
know.
I don't play.
I'll have you
So-
all on the Dark Souls podcast I record with myself.
I
just
do wanna
write
play
two
Dark
different
Souls sometimes.
Sets of lines. It's great.
It's on the Switch.
It is. I saw a guy playing it next to me, and I was just like, I should get a Switch.
I do like my Switch very much.
But yeah,
So-
what were they chanting at her that night? I can't remember.
Well, so
Besides
Oh, my
crack
goal
whore.
wasn't to get back on that topic. Sorry.
Let's
yeah.
finish that up. Finish that up.
Okay.
Here's the short version. Trish and Lita were in the ring. They would often chant like slut at Trish because she was the heel.
Jesus.
And then Trish would turn to the crowd and point at Lita and be like, don't call her a slut, and everyone would boo. Well, they did the same thing, except the crowd was chanting slut at Lita. So when Trish turned to the crowd and said, don't call her a slut, everyone cheered. You see the psychology of all that and how it fit into wrestling at the time, and why it had to change quite a lot.
That shit is dark, man.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that was the first instance of the "You've got herpes" chant.
Well, outside of ECW.
Whoa.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
First off, isn't that like 80% of the human population?
Yes.
Yeah.
Most of us have herpes.
Yeah, if you
Herpes
don't
scare
have
is
herpes,
like-
3 of us
you
have
should-
herpes confirmed.
Yeah. If you don't have herpes,
I
you
don't.
should feel bad. That is, I
Right.
feel like, the main takeaway I want people to have in this episode.
And then there's the great Edge speared Lita chant, which is so
Jesus.
perfect because the spear is Edge's.
Oh, I
finishing
remember
move.
that.
so
Yeah.
it was his finishing move in both the ways that you could mean
Yes.
that. So refs, one.
I like the ref.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So at first I'm watching this match.
Most of that's gonna get cut out.
And I'm enjoying. Well, you'll. I think you'd be amazed how much of that I'm gonna keep.
Butts.
Okay,
That's just
enough
gonna
of the
come in
butts.
and out.
Button for that.
Yeah, that'll be the bumper between segments. It's just bunts.
Please no.
So I'm watching this, and at first I was like really trying to figure out what was appealing or what was interesting about the reffing in this match, and then obviously later on in the match there's a really tremendous reffing event.
Yeah.
But at the time I'm watching this, and I'm starting to see the wrestlers communicate through refs
All the time.
And
all the time.
What's an example of that?
Like, ow, my face is broken. Please tell the other guy my face is broken so we can stop the match. That's a real good example of that.
Are there ways that they will coordinate through you, sort of? Not just for like...
If they need to.
Mm.
If they need to. If they need to change something that they're doing.
You got to keep them abreast of the time in the match, right? When they have to go home.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that depends on what company it is.
And what the match is.
Yeah, and what the match is. But yes, absolutely.
And counting seems like an art unto itself, kind of like not just the 2 counts, which are very good, but in this match there's a few times where somebody's out of the ring, and you got to count. And I imagine that there is a, you're sort of communicating with them while you're doing this, kind of, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because like if they just went outside and the ref wasn't there and I wasn't counting, how would they get back in the ring? It's the rules.
Yeah,
Someone has
why
to be
would
there
they
to
get in the ring?
even if it's a choreography, you have to still have within that choreography someone who gives the illusion of there being some sort of control.
But I imagine you have to stall quite a bit as well, right? Because they're not always going to answer that 10 count.
Yeah.
In a prompt fashion.
You tend to learn. You tend to learn real quick that like certain types of matches you count. I mean, I try to count the same at everyone because I'm a jerk. I try to enforce like the same counts in all my matches because I feel like fans will notice when you're counting really slow and it takes you out of the match. I mean, if there's a specific request to me to like be a little generous, then I will oblige that. But if you slow it down too much, it's then like for that one match, it looks out of place next to the rest of those. That's just me though. But I'm always going to listen to like, that's always up to the promoter. In the end, it's whoever.
Well, some promoters tell their refs to be really hard.
Yeah.
To be like, you're in charge. This is real. If the guys mess up, just call it real.
So-
Some promoters don't.
So if you get to like an 8 count on the outside and it looks like these guys are not going to make it back by 10 if you keep the pace that you're at, what do you do?
If I get to 10 and they're not in the ring when they're supposed to get in the ring and they refuse to get in the ring, you have to end the match, even if it's not what was supposed to happen.
So you'll just go to 10
Yeah, and I mean, if it's Chikara, I'll go to 20.
or 20.
Lucha rules and stuff. I get thrown off whenever anyone says 8 anymore because I've just done so much reffing in Chikara under the 20 counts.
Sure.
How much of reffing is real? Like in the same way that wrestling is not real in the sense of it being a contest, but it's very real in the sense that it is trained people doing wrestling on each other and stuff like that. Like, to what degree are you enforcing any kind of a rule, or to what degree are you making decisions independent of the wrestlers?
I mean, only if the only reason I should have to like make a decision, like a real decision, and Doc, you can back me up on this one if I'm wrong, because you're more experienced in the business than I do. I have 5 years, if anyone's wondering. Yeah. 2 years of less than 2 actually, of actually performing in front of.
I've been around significantly longer than you.
Yeah,
You've certainly reffed a lot of matches. By now.
Repeat your question, Evan. I'm sorry.
Just the essence of it.
So how much of what you
yeah.
do is real, in the sense of how much are you enforcing the rules as they may be, and how much are you making decisions independent of the two wrestlers?
I have the authority to do so if I absolutely have to. I shouldn't. Most of it's like still part of the choreography and communication and making sure no one gets hurt, things like that. But I would say, like, I have the authority to call something if something's going wrong. The only reason I should be having to make real on-the-fly decisions is if something's gone wrong.
To what degree do you need to sort of assert your authority with the wrestlers? So is there a sort of real struggle to some degree in terms of them trying to get away with things?
Oh, yeah. Like, all the time. Like, not all the time. I've had very few problems with it myself. I can only think of a couple incidents. I'm not gonna go put anyone out there like that, though. Of just, it's so...
I know you don't want to name the guy who you repeatedly asked, is there anything you need to tell me? And he said, yeah, and then you go out there and he does some blatant cheating move directly in front of you. Yeah, he blew the mist in someone's face, and like it was the first time you were working for that promoter, so you didn't just want to disqualify the guy.
Whoa.
So you didn't, and like, so we're not going to say who that is, but that happened, and that's the kind of struggles that refs have to go through.
And then everything looks like bullshit.
Right, then everything looks
Wait,
terrible.
what happened?
Okay, so maybe we shouldn't cut this story if we're not going to name names.
Just don't name names. Don't be specific.
Yeah, if you mess up,
to.
I'll bleep something out.
If you want to bury the guy, that's your choice.
No,
but
I'm
the
not
story is
I'm
valid.
not burying anyone.
Yeah.
I'm not
I
here
will
to bury
go
anyone.
start a Twitter fight with this motherfucker tonight.
Butts.
Okay, I will. I'll bleep that out.
Wait, the one who was the
Butts.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh, he got a couple big bookings, and his
Yeah, let's
head
not
did
actually
this.
bury this.
Okay, yeah. Wait, here, yeah. So here, I want to hear the story.
Betsy, why don't you tell us about this story where a wrestler blatantly cheated in front of you and it was a problem?
There was a promotion that was not Shikara that I worked for, where I asked several times, is there anything you need to tell me before you went out there? Both said yes several times, and then one of the people in the match proceeded to spit mist in their opponent's face directly in front of me, which is supposed to be an automatic disqualification. So then I have to stand there, and I've never worked for this place before. I don't know what the promoter wants. I don't know what his stance on that kind of thing is. Turns out I could have thrown the match out right there and then, judging by the attitude of everyone in the locker room afterwards. But I didn't know if I was able to make that decision. So as far as like real decisions, like you have to be comfortable in a place first. You don't want to do anything rash in a promotion where you don't know the promoter that well.
And so there was an agreed upon finish that was not a disqualification because of the mist.
Yes.
But they hadn't told you that the mist was supposed to factor into it at all.
No, I think they might have honestly called it on the fly, which you can't do that when there's a ref in the ring and not tell the ref.
Unless you distract the ref, right?
Yes.
Which they did not do.
They didn't even try.
No.
Doing something like that, sort of unprovoked and unplanned as a wrestler, like that's got to be incredibly frowned upon, right?
Yeah, usually in a situation like that, if the referee does call for the DQ because one wrestler blatantly breaks the rules in front of the referee, when you get to the back, the wrestlers are in trouble, usually, not the referee, for, being stupid, for putting on a stupid show. It's like, well, either the ref doesn't call for a DQ and this is all garbage and and we're not putting on a real show here. Which, like, it's like if the Avengers started calling each other by their actor names. We all know who they are and what's going on, but you don't want to go to the movies and see that.
I remember about 10 years ago, there was a push by the WWE. Like, they put out an edict to their referees saying, start calling it for real. Like start calling DQs if people don't break holds at 5 or whatever. And they started doing it, and I think that might have had something to do with the whole Benoit tragedy, because his very last match before he killed himself and his family, he was disqualified, seemingly. Or someone in the match was disqualified, and it didn't seem like that was supposed to be the finish, and he seemed pretty hot about it.
But if you don't call it, then it looks terrible, and you don't want that on your stage.
It frustrates me because it puts me in a position where I can't win. I can't win. No matter what I do here, it's going to look bad. Either the finish is ruined or it looks bogus. It looks bogus, like I don't care. Doc, you just said how when the wrestler gets to the back, usually they're the one in trouble, not the ref, if that kind of thing happens.
Yeah.
When we got to the back, he was the one in trouble.
Right.
But they asked me, did he tell you he was going to do that? I'm like, no. He's like, okay, next time you can disqualify him if that happens. You could have this time if you just wanted to be an asshole. And I just didn't want to be an asshole. It was a place I'd never been.
It was young guys working out their stuff.
And then he found the wrestler that was in the match and chewed him out
Yeah.
for not telling the ref he was going to do something like that.
Because I feel like, anywhere where you get like a bunch of young people, mostly dudes, who are hyper into working out and stuff, you're going to get people being really competitive. I guess I just don't understand what the point of that is in wrestling, right? Like in any sport, MMA, anything where you're, fucking competing for something, I understand being competitive, but what's the point of being competitive as a wrestler? Obviously, there's a concept of like some people are better at it than other people, but why would you manifest that as being a dick to each other in a situation where you are supposed to be collaborating?
Oh, there's no point.
I mean, you're competing for spots on the card, though. It's like actors beefing with each other because they don't think they're getting enough screen time or something like that.
Ben nailed it right there. It does not gravitate itself towards sports drama. It gravitates itself towards entertainment-based drama, where everyone's competing for the same roles.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to be the lead actor.
My mother sang opera for a number of years, and it seemed to be an unofficial rule that you shouldn't have friends who had the same vocal range that you did, because you might have to just bone each other out of a role at some point. And then it's also the same thing, like in comedy, it's the same thing. In music, it's the same thing, I guess, where like if there's somebody who does basically the same thing that you do, and then you're kind of like, well, if you're around, what's the fucking point of me being here? Then, you're naturally going to have issues with each other. All right, so that makes sense. That checks out.
And just everyone has egos.
Yeah.
Myself included.
One of the best parts about doing commentary, which is what I've primarily been doing lately, is that, like, it's not that there isn't competition in commentary, but all of the wrestlers aren't out to get you. They all want you to make them look great, so they all want you to feel good about that.
Something that I noticed in this match is that you have to have a bunch of false endings in a match, it seems. Like that's a key to building tension.
Depends on the match.
Well, especially most of the matches we've shown you so far have been major main events, which is where that happens. Sometimes you see a show where, like I said, the second match with several guys you don't care about do a lot of false finishes, and it's like, don't do that. Don't do that. Do a finish. The people can have the falsies later. I'm going on.
This brings us to what I think is probably the most important part of this match, for our purposes at least, which is the big dramatic ref moment at the end. So, Betsy, why don't you introduce that for us?
So initially you have Jimmy Corderas in this match as the referee, and he's doing an amazing job. But at some point, the big uh-oh happens, and Edge moves out of the way when Undertaker's going to boot him, and Corderas goes down. And let me tell you, refs have 1 hit point.
Yeah, that was my thought, is that they seem so delicate. He folded like
we have 1 hit point. We just go down the slightest gust of wind.
The advantage of having a guest referee, as we saw in the Bret Hart Austin match, is that they have more than 1 hit point. That's why you would bring in a guest. We'll get to that later.
I also love Corderas when Edge wants to go for the pin, and Corderas is knocked out, and he's like laying there on the apron, and Edge goes to like pull him back into the ring, but accidentally pushes him a little bit further, and he just rolls out.
I did not notice that, but that's great.
And that he gets hit, and he not only collapses, but immediately collapses in such a way as he is covering his eyes and ears.
Yes, so he
Yeah.
can't see or hear anything that happens behind him
Right.
ever again.
He can't feel the mat bouncing up and down or the.
He's Anson My Eyes Johnson. Everything's black.
Yeah, and he ends up unconscious for like 5-10 minutes, which
Yeah,
is
that's
pretty
very-
much means you're dead.
Yeah,
right?
that is super bad for you
Super
on a
bad
medical
for
level.
you.
Wait, and it's also because I imagine that refs must be trained in first aid to some degree, right? Because part of being a ref is coming
Yeah,
over and being like, "Are you
sure.
okay? Oh, good God, you are not okay."
You're
No.
trained on how to tell the stage, the students to go get ice.
These days they know how to patch up a wound, right? Because they don't want that much blood on TV. So if someone bleeds accidentally, the ref will take out this kit, which looks like, I don't know, glue
No,
or
the
something.
ref
and-
gets out their gloves so they don't have to touch the blood, and then the doctor comes over.
No, but for a little while when WWE was really trying not to do the blood, the ref would take out a whole kit, and it ruined
Oh, they'd stop
several
the match.
matches. Do you remember there was
Happened to Christian.
there was
at
one
point, I think.
NXT match? I think it was Samoa
Joe,
Joe
yeah.
and Shinsuke Nakamura.
and Joe was
Right.
pissed.
or was it Finn Balor?
It was
No.
Joe definitely,
It's
and
definitely Joe.
yeah,
No, I think it was Joe and Balor.
yeah, and Joe was pissed.
Joe was really pissed. Yeah, it ruined the whole flow of the match because the ref was trying to patch up this pretty awful wound that Samoa Joe had. So yeah, I guess that might count as CPR.
So then a bunch of ballyhoo and cheating happens, and a lot of stuff happens in the next couple minutes with there being no ref, which proves why there needs to be a ref, because for the sake of the story, like, there's no ref. Look what happened.
Well, Edge, the ultimate opportunist, was able to pull out his dirty bag of tricks.
So Undertaker finally gets Edge down, goes for the pin. Oh no, nobody's home. Jimmy Corderas might be dead. Might actually be dead. Someone should really check on him.
Someone should really check on him. Yes.
And it waits the perfect amount of time, the perfect amount of seconds of there being no ref to shoot to the top of the ramp, where outruns Charles Robinson, one of the greatest referees of his generation, possibly of all time.
They referred to him as if all fans would know. Ah, yes, of course.
Yes.
They
this
do.
guy, which is like that has to really mean something.
He
Even
had
Ref.
been reffing since the early 90s, and before that, you can see him like sitting in the crowd dressed as Ric Flair in the
yes,
South.
he's
Yeah, he came to notoriety because he looked kind of like a small version of Ric Flair.
Yeah.
So people started calling him Lil Nate.
I noticed he did have an amazing haircut.
Yes.
He does.
Yeah.
He still does.
Oh, and that plays into the moment too, because it's like the way the wind sort of blew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
his
here's the
coif.
conversation that I think happened backstage that year. I think they turned to Lil Nate and they're like, Lil Nate, Robinson, Chuck, we need you to run out there as though the Undertaker's WrestleMania streak depends on just how fast you can run. And he went and he nailed it. It feels impossibly long as he just comes down the aisle.
That enormous stadium,
And
you
then
know?
he just
Tiny little guy.
fucking sails in like a pro.
Oh,
I was
that's-
just
With
like,
his hand already in the air and
Lands in
stops at
perfect-
exactly the right
Sliding is like advanced ref technique for me. Like, my slides suck, but that's one of the best best ref slides of all time, bar none. And then and then Edge kicks out. Ah!
Right. So yeah. So he lands in perfect position to make the count. Edge kicks out, and this is something I wanted to ask you about, Betsy. Is I think there's a couple different ways of thinking about this. Do you think that should have been the finish? Because that really, in some ways, was the climax, the emotional excitement of the match. It goes on a little bit longer, and they do the whole Hell's Gate finish, and that ended up sort of leading into the storyline going on. And so for storyline purposes, I understand why they went with the Hell's Gate. But do you think that, as a match, it would have been better if that was the finish?
This is going to sound weird. I don't think it actively hurt the match that it wasn't the finish, but I think it would have been probably a better finish. Like, it didn't ruin the match that it wasn't the finish. The finish that they used was still really good, but man, that should have been the finish. Yeah.
There's only one reason why I think maybe it was right for it not to be the finish, which is that I think that might have been the only moment when it actually seemed like the streak was in jeopardy. Once Edge kicked out of the tombstone after that whole thing, that was the only genuine false ending.
Could Edge really hang on through spite and evil to beat The Undertaker?
And that is where, if you're hearing that in the background, that's just we've opened a hellstorm in the
Hell's
sky
Gate.
here in New York City.
I think that might actually
so
be
don't worry.
thunder.
And then, it's
No,
just
no,
thunder.
It's definitely Hell's
Thank
Gate.
fucking Christ! I thought it was a Hell's Gate.
Oh, maybe the Hell's Gate it sounds like thunder.
The Hell's Gate, a.k.a. the Go-Go Plata in
Plata, yes.
Jiu-Jitsu. Just,
You're taking a jiu-jitsu class, Ben. We all
many
get it.
My name's
years ago.
Dr. Abelson, and I'm taking a jiu-jitsu class.
I am a master of grappling with the mind. So now all that is left is for me to master the grappling of the body. That's what you sound like. A wrap up for the match. Just a couple stray observations at the end. Oh wait,
Let me say one other thing about Jimmy Corderas.
He sure is bald.
Maybe this should go earlier, but I one of the things, the hard parts of reffing that particular match, and I think that Jimmy Corderas did really well, is the balance between being afraid of these guys, particularly the Undertaker, but still being assertive enough to like control the match. So you have to kind of like be a little bit nervous, but overcoming that fear in order to be the authority. Do you ever have find that it's hard, or that you have to put in effort to strike that balance between being sort of like sufficiently afraid of the wrestlers because they're big scary wrestlers, but also maintaining your authority as an official?
Oh yeah, especially considering I'm a female ref that refs primarily male matches at this point. It's really hard because I'm only 5'3", and almost every single one of these guys is taller or bigger than me in some way. Where male refs, like, they're usually smaller than the wrestlers too, but they don't have as much of a height difference usually. I'm small even for a ref, so I struggle not to just look petrified at all times. It's one of the main things I struggle with. Sometimes I'm like, it's just my face. It's just the way my face looks.
And I mean, with one hit point, like, you got to be pretty scared.
Yeah, you gotta try to make sure that you don't get hit at all because you have that one hit point.
Because if they do even like accidentally bump into you, you should probably take a bump.
Oh yeah. Yeah, especially if it's like when I was reffing all those Proteus wheel matches, they were all so much bigger than me.
I always like Nick Patrick's like 6 foot tall, 240 pound, one hit point ref bump. You throw his arms in the air, stick them once again directly to his eyes and his ears, and then fall all the way down out of the ring. When guys sometimes half his size would elbow him a little bit in the side, and he's just like, "Oh no, I'm dead."
Earl Hebner would like completely flip over.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Before we move on to the bad match, there was just one thing I need to clear up, which is at one point Edge throws the Undertaker like onto some audience members.
Yeah.
That seems like I'm surprised that they can do that legally.
Well, I mean, the spot works really well because from the camera angle, you can't tell that there's even that much space as there was between the guardrail and the audience. So there was like enough space kind of for Undertaker's back, but you can't see that from the original camera angle. So it really looks like he's launched directly into their laps.
Now, in smaller shows, especially in states where the state athletic commission isn't so strict, you'll see that kind of thing happen with some regularity. There's a very famous shot from an ECW where Bam Bam Bigelow pressed Spike Dudley completely over his head, threw him all just into the audience, and the audience caught him and body surfed him around the audience for a while.
There was that time that B.J. Whitmer powerbombed Jimmy Jacobs into the audience at that ROH show that we were at,
God.
Doc,
Yeah.
which looked insane until we realized that it wasn't actual audience members. It was like the ROH students.
Well, they
who were
cleared the way, so Jimmy just landed on the chairs.
Oh, well, there was that too.
The other time.
Yeah, that wasn't the one we were there for. That was the
Yeah.
one. That was the really crazy one in Chicago, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah. Those guys had some crazy spots.
Yeah, Jimmy Jacobs don't walk too good these days, do we?
No.
This week's bad match was a match that I didn't honestly even fucking bother to rewatch.
You're not missing much.
Yeah, I rewatched Undertaker Edge, and I'm glad I did because I enjoyed it a lot more. And then I started to rewatch this one, and I was just like, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Where I'm like, I could do anything else that's not this, and that would be better. Like,
you could
this
have watched
is
Undertaker Edge for a third time.
Yeah, honestly, would have gotten a lot more out of it.
Let's give you some background on TNA.
Oh, you guys take this one.
Well, one way that they're clearly better than all other wrestling is that they have fucking 6 sides to the ring.
Well,
Six sides.
So that's like, I mean, this is a game changer. Is this even? How have other
more
people not
sides.
experimented with this? They're 2 better than all other wrestling.
It's actually a Mexican wrestling thing. Traditional lucha libre rings are 6 sides.
Of course,
Yeah.
it's just fucking white people stealing
Well.
ideas, all the good stuff.
And man, are the TNA people white.
Oh, they're so white.
The
They're so
Carter
white.
family, or the original owners,
Right.
the
original
Carter
owners.
family,
And then
who
there-
own Panda Energy, which that was the parent company.
And then they got ran by Nazis for a while. Actual Nazis.
Oh, the Harris boys
Yes.
and their SS tattoos.
Yes, they're Nazis.
Yes. And
Wait,
Maybe
they owned
maybe I shouldn't
TNA?
call them Nazis.
Well,
If you have an SS tattoo, you can call somebody a Nazi. I think that's
they were the
fair.
heads of the
Yeah,
booking
yeah,
committee.
Evan's right. Ha ha, Nazis.
I don't know how much of TNA they owned, but they certainly ran a bunch of it for a while.
It's certainly Southern wrestling. It's
Yeah,
it's the continuation of that tradition, but it was also just been terribly mismanaged for years and years and years, and yet has continued to exist. And it's just occupied this space in like not quite indie wrestling, where it was sort of the de facto largest competitor to the WWE. But it was so terrible that it could never actually usurp any of the WWE's share of the market. But it just had this like spoiler position that where like no other company could rise to be that kind of competition because TNA continued to exist.
It's kind of like the Libertarian Party to the WWE's Republicans
Absolutely.
to some degree. Yeah.
You get a lot of crazy ideas. Some of them might be palatable, but taken as a bunch
Yeah.
of them, it's not a philosophy that'll ever really hold water.
6 sides to a
Yeah.
wrestling thing, great, but like, privatizing water, like probably
not
great.
the deal.
Yeah.
Apparently, also the 6-sided ring is a pain in the ass to work in.
I'm sure
The ropes have to be tightened a lot harder.
It's really hard. It's much harder to balance on the top rope because it's a wider angle.
I'm trying to think how you would even put one together. I've never seen one
Yeah.
like disassembled.
Yeah, neither
How does
have
that
I.
even work?
So this match starts.
Oh, hold on. Let's say what the
Okay.
match is.
Oh yeah,
Let's say
yeah,
what the
please.
match is.
Yeah.
The Professor Abelson, you seem to be the only one that's remembered everybody in this match because it barely matters.
It's-
Please
So-
give us the rundown.
So it's the Monsters Ball match from Bound for Glory 2008 for the TNA Tag Team titles. The champions are Beer Money, James Storm, and Bobby Roode,
Great
who
tag
are
team.
actually a great team.
They
yeah.
were amazing.
They're
In
very
fact,
good.
actually, most of the participants in this match are quite talented.
Yeah. The
You have-
problem was TNA.
Right, exactly, and that's constantly been the problem with TNA is they've had all this great talent and have just squandered them. So it was Beer Money, it was Team 3D, formerly the Dudley Boys in ECW and WWE, who many think are the greatest tag team of all time. They're one of the most successful tag teams of all time.
Yes.
Then there's the original LAX, the original Latin American exchange of Homicide and Hernandez. Homicide, who we actually have mentioned before on this podcast.
Another great wrestler, another very
didn't-
good team.
Didn't we watch something that wasn't he in another bad match? that
No,
No.
we
we were
mentioned that
going to maybe, but we didn't.
we mentioned that he was in a good match on the same show as that bad ROH match.
Okay.
that Scramble
Scramble,
Cage
yeah.
thing we watched. And then there were Abyss and Matt Morgan are the last team. I think we've talked about Matt Morgan at some point as well, who was a guy who had a lot of physical gifts, a lot of talent. On paper should have been a big star, but just like never really connected with the audience. Yeah, so that was everybody. And, it's interesting because this is kind of like that Scramble match, except the people involved are quite talented and all the individual parts aren't really bad. It's
All
just
the
kind-
individual parts
Well, not
bad?
all the individual parts. And that brings us to the point of us talking about this match, which is that one of the parts was quite faulty, and that was the special referee, Steve Mongo McMichael.
Look out, everyone! Here comes Mongo.
Here comes Mongo.
Yeah. So this match starts, and he comes in, and he looks both disinterested and entitled. Like, he's both like, I don't give a shit about being here, but goddamn right, you fucking people brought me here and you should worship me for it. And, like, he looks like he's about to come in and go into the ring and, like, order a sandwich from the ref or something. I don't mean that as him being a fat guy, but as in more just in terms of he is here and everybody is beneath him, and this whole thing seems beneath him. And also I'm looking at him like, I don't know you, but you don't seem like a person who there are a lot of things that are beneath you.
Wow.
Maybe that's judgmental.
Yeah.
But then he
No, I think
proceeds
you're right.
to, like, really just look like an asshole throughout this whole match, and not
Yeah.
in a way that it looked like he was acting. Like,
No.
like throughout this whole match, I'm like, I feel like that's how this guy is every day.
He's mostly just standing there, barely paying attention to the match.
Well, while the competitors get more and more upset that their ref is so bad.
Well, they were having this fast-paced contest with a lot of covers in it, and he's breaking the rhythm. It's like boom, 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 move, cover, one knee, the other knee, 1,
Yeah.
2, kick.
Like, whether you like the style or not, it depends on its frenetic pace, which he is interrupting with his slow count.
You mentioned the knee thing. It's an interesting contrast to what Evan was saying earlier about Charles Robinson's ability to just, like, slide in that ring faster and smoother than you ever see anyone do it when he ran down that ramp. And then here we go to a ref that can't move his knees. I mean, being able to get up and down is one of the most critical parts of being a referee.
Yeah,
if you
just
can't do
physically.
that, you have nothing.
Yeah, and it's not like he has the time to get down and get into a position where he can actually see the shoulders clearly to make the count.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're not making the counts right, you don't have anything. These are the most integral parts of being a ref, and he was standing there failing at it.
Refs seem to be like, there's the two key factors there appear to be in reffing is that it's a very physical thing. There's a real physicality to it where you're following the match, you're communicating that you're engaged with the match, and then there's a status where, you, like you said, you have to be, like, scared enough of them but also authoritative, and that's a complicated thing to get across physically. And this guy comes in and his physicality says, I'm fucking not doing anything. I'm here to get a check and go home.
He came out
did.
already checked out.
Yeah, and his status is that I am truly uninvested in this match, and it seems it hacks away at the essential thing in wrestling. And this is the question that I'm still kind of dealing with. I can't tell how important it is for this to appear like a genuine competition that is being judged by real rules.
I mean, when you watch Stranger Things, is it important to you that it be realistic and feel like you're actually watching footage of some children get chased by a scary goo monster?
Well, I mean, like, kinda, right? Like
Yeah.
every story, we like the ones where people react. When you watch horror movies, all right, like I just watched Hereditary, and one thing I loved about that movie, this is not a spoiler or anything, but there's no part of Hereditary where you're looking at somebody like, get out of the fucking basement, you idiot. Well, you know what? You deserve to die. And that's like an overwhelming majority of horror movies. And that's part of why it's effective, is because there's nothing like that. So that's the thing. Like, I get that everybody's watching the match and knows that it's fake. But then also here with this match, like, he's so uninvested and so clearly not enforcing it and, like, not giving it any appearance of being real. And then who fucking gives a shit? Who gives a shit that one guy stabbed another guy with a fork or whatever?
Well, see, that's the thing. The ref had a shitty... The match itself wasn't shitty. The ref made the match shitty. The ref makes or break the match, breaks that match. And, I mean, for most wrestling fans, yes, that veneer of being able to engage yourself and pretend like it's real in those moments is important. I've been in situations myself where I've messed up and shattered that illusion. I don't ever want to be in that position again. I've made it my mission in my career not to ever be in that position again where I was the ref that ruined someone's big moment.
Yeah, and like in movies, there's different degrees of realism that are going to be appropriate to the style or what you're trying to get across. But yeah, you whatever those expectations are and are set at the beginning, you want to keep true to them.
Yeah, that's the key. The universe, like any kind of fictional universe, sets rules. And if you follow those rules, however outlandish or however tight they may be, then the people watching will be satisfied. But as soon as you break those rules, then it doesn't matter anymore. So it doesn't have to do so much with the veneer of realism or not. You'll see Kota Ibushi versus a blow-up doll, and the crowd will be cheering every time the blow-up doll gets a near fall because they had established, okay, we know, but we're not gonna blink if you're not gonna blink.
And who's counting the pins for that blow-up doll?
The ref.
Exactly.
The ref believes the blow-up doll can get you, so the fans
Now,
do.
still in the match of the blow-up doll does depend on it at least looking a little bit like the blow-up doll is actually doing the moves to Kota Ibushi.
Well, Kota Ibushi
right?
is a genius, and that's another story
So
entirely.
it has its own sort of standard of
Yeah.
realism. Like, right, we all know it's a blow-up doll, but in that split second, it really looks like the blow-up doll is delivering that Hurricane Rana.
Are those multiple Canadian destroyers? That was amazing. Kota Ibushi's a genius.
I mean, of course, that's also a commentary on the fact that with moves like a Hurricane Rana or a Canadian Destroyer, it's largely in the person taking the move,
Yes.
such that, in fact, the person supposedly performing the move doesn't really have to do anything.
We'll have to watch this match
Oh,
at
yeah.
some point.
Oh, yeah,
we'll get
Yeah,
to
that-
yeah.
You'll like the more ridiculous sides of pro wrestling, which we haven't looked at any like new avant-garde stuff. You've seen the clowns and the kings. You've never seen any like actual artistic stuff.
Anybody have any final thoughts on reffing? I feel like I get a little bit more what the purpose of reffing is. I feel like I know kind of what to look for in a match.
My main thing that I've always told anyone, not just you, about what's the point of there being a ref in a staged fight is the fight still has to have an end. If there was no ref in the ring, who would count the pinfall? Like the crowd? No, don't trust the crowd. They'll just do what they want.
So yeah, that's an interesting question because there have been a few instances of matches without refs. Of
Yes.
unsanctioned matches, and I actually just watched the recent one in Chikara.
Yes, the chain match, correct?
And in that one, actually, the crowd did sort of make the count.
Yeah.
At the end.
But that's
Yes,
the
but that was
exception.
the thing. That was like a special scenario.
It's something I always thought about because I remember in junior high school when they did the whole Marvel versus DC comic book thing, and they had like one-on-one matches, which had winners and losers. But it was kind of like, well, how do you really decide that it's over? That someone really won and the other, like if the other guy ends up getting up 5 minutes later and jumps the other person, is that a new match? Is that a new fight? So I guess as someone
What
who
a
grew up.
flesh wound.
Yeah, I guess as someone who grew up and didn't get into a lot of fights as a kid, like I didn't have a clear sense of like when a fight is definitively over.
Yeah.
And so I needed what is presented in wrestling as like an official determination of that. And without that, it's like, yeah, I can't really get a clear sense of who's a winner and loser. But I guess, if I had been knocked out a few more times, maybe I
Well,
would.
that's the sporting aspect.
I can help with that.
That's why Betsy will beat the crap out of you. But
I'm
that's
sure.
that's the sporting aspect. That's the difference between it being, professional wrestling, the simulated sport, and professional wrestling, just two guys pounding on each other.
So everybody is going to plug their pluggables. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook at Evan Burke, etc. That's Evan Burke, ETC. You can also find my writing at evanburke.biz. It's Burke, B-U-R-K-E.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at ScribeBen. You can find some of my academic work on my academia.edu page if you have one of those yourself. And you can find me in your worst nightmares.
And you can find me on Twitter at Dr. Diamondfire. That's at Dr. Diamondfire. At me if you'd like to book me to wrestle, commentate, ring announce. I do a little bit of everything. And our guest, Betsy, where can people find you on the internet or perhaps in real life?
You can find me either on the internet on Twitter at bchikaros, where you can also find my booking information. You can find me in real life majestically riding the back of Bubbles through the streets of Philadelphia. Bubbles is real, at Bubbles the Bear 3.
Bubbles is a real, actual bear.
I quickly want to point out that
Yes.
even though this is a podcast filled with foul language, Doc does work clean. If you listen to the podcast, Doc works clean.
Thank you, Evan.
So, like, recognize that.
If you'd like me to work dirty, I can work dirty, but you request that. I don't just come out all foul and then you ask me to tone it down. I work a little dirty in XSW, but that show is at a comedy club at midnight. And that's all I have to say
that's
about
appropriate.
that.
So, you can also please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/contestingwrestling. We are going to have a bunch of bonus content up there soon that will make it worth your while, including watch-alongs, bonus episodes, stuff like that. And you can look in the notes for this episode and find our Twitter handle, because I have not created it yet, but it'll be in there. And you can just follow the show if you don't want to follow us individually. And yeah, please support us on Patreon so we can bring you more and better stuff, and so we don't have to work anymore.
Book me to be on your wrestling show.
Yeah.
I don't want to
Please.
sell crystal meth anymore, guys.
Cool. I would like to continue selling crystal meth, but it's hard on my day job salary. So support this podcast.
That's
so
every
I can
Bruce
sell crystal
Springsteen
meth.
song you ever heard, I think.
It is. I've
Yeah.
been listening to a lot of country music lately,
Yeah,
and it's well, that's a whole other thing.
It's a whole other story.
Alrighty, thank you. This has been Contesting Wrestling.